Hey, Geoff, good to see you again. Thanks for being
Oh
here.
yeah, yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah. And so we're kind of continuing in our tutorial
Mm,
construct of materiality, where you kick the tires of this lens that I've created. Just before I hand over to you to put me on the spot and ask me some questions, I want to share a wee bit of context of where my head is right now that I hope sharpens the conversation we have, in that I've just made the Material World Substack live. Very sincere hat tip to you for the idea around the name. And I guess we're both products of the 80s at the end of the day. And
I think so, especially if you've seen me at karaoke.
oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, hopefully we'll do that again soon. And
Yeah.
so that all the more sharpens my focus on wanting to make sure what we do here and what happens in the material world
Mm,
serves decision makers trying to move the needle on industrial healing so that the economy really does work in service of life. So that's kind of what's
yeah.
rolling around in my mind. As you know, just minutes before we turned the recording on, that went live. So with that, I'm in your hands. What do you want to talk about
Okay.
today?
Excellent. Well, I look forward to reading that first article. So that's great. But yeah, ahead of that, so we talked a little bit about JBS, and I would really like to understand more about that business, about what they do, how you figured out everything. I remember going through that assessment, and it was incredibly in depth. So, where did you start? That's probably the
Mhm.
best question to go with.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned it's incredibly in depth. I realize one of my challenges is to make some of that depth useful and try
Yeah,
to
sure.
pull it up. So hopefully some of what happens here today will do that. And I really welcome more questions to try to make the insights here as usable as possible. So this is the assessment in question, and there's lots here. And I need to just tuck you a little off to the side there. So there's an interactive table of contents
Mhm.
that goes through it all. What I always try to do at the beginning of thinking about materiality, which is really trying to understand how a company is or isn't contributing to an economy and service of life, well, I need to look at their purpose. Like what
Right.
do they say that they do?
Yeah.
And then are they doing that? So it was kind of an exciting adventure with JBS, because even understanding what they do ended up being quite challenging. That's explored in quite a bit of detail in theme 3, but I'm gonna just go into some of the opening stuff around trying to
Okay.
figure out their purpose. And I'll just say, I'm going to say some critical things. I don't mean them to throw the company under the bus, but I will say this was a very challenging assessment from the get-go, because the disclosures were quite convoluted and in some cases
Mm,
contradictory. So where most companies just figuring out what they say their purpose is pretty straightforward, even that with JBS was confusing. And as you can see on this slide, there's a real mishmash of what they state their purpose is. Sometimes they call it their mission, their purpose. I can live with that blur. But it really kind of wobbled even in the same report. So if you see these page numbered boxes that kind of arc around the bottom left here, in the very same report, they state their purpose in kind of mishy-mashy ways. Having said
and
that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, and if I remember rightly on this one, the boxes that are edged in red are actual things that the company has published.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for
Okay.
pointing that out. So just from a visual cue perspective, as these
Yeah.
slides, they're kind of more performance art than corporate presentation. And I
Yeah.
mean that sincerely. So in this version of the performance, anything outlined in red is hyperlinked, and it goes to the source that really came from JBS. So a red outline
Mm,
is a screen grab or something very directly from them. And so, criticism of the phrasing aside, I was able to more or less discern that the purpose of this company is to feed a lot of people as well as they can. And they
yeah,
were, yeah.
that's the gist I'm getting from these, the feeding the world with the best there is, etc. But yeah, yeah, interesting that they have so many different ways of phrasing it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then as we explore materiality, I like to look at that phrase as best as I can understand it, and then figure out, well, are they doing that? So they say that this is what they do. Is that how they make money? And that became a bit of an adventure. So yeah, maybe steer me, because there's so many places I could go on that adventure. What would be
so so JBS isn't a company I'd ever come across before this, but it's clear to me from the assessment that they're absolutely huge and they have tendrils everywhere. So which feels more like a conglomerate than the kind of one company that does one thing. So how did you kind of figure out overall what it does? I mean, feeding the world, what contributes to that? Where do they do it? How do they do it, etc.? Was that something that was fairly clear up front, or
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It was really tricky to figure it out. So what I'll maybe do to make some sense of this is I'll show you where I landed, and then kind of back up into where that might matter, because I think, so I'll show you how I was able to wrap my arms around what the business does, and maybe give a bit more context as you prod me. I think it's really helpful for any corporate disclosures, but especially any that are trying to signal to stakeholders how and where and why they have an impact, that they give some kind of overview of their business at a glance. I find a pictorial one helpful, but there's different ways to do that. Maybe pie charts, maybe a very simple table. And I could not find one comprehensive overview of what JBS does. So I ended up making one. This is literally PowerPoint using the native icons in PowerPoint. So in some ways, this is very, very simple. Most people have all the technology they need to do this in their laptops already. Definitely took a little bit of time, but this is just me playing in PowerPoint to try to make sense of it. You mentioned you haven't heard of the company before. It's generally not a consumer-facing company, although it has many brands which are, but it does a lot of things. So I'm just going to quickly sweep us through the arc of this company, which is headquartered in Brazil, operating in many companies in all around the world. They're probably most widely known in the kind of ESG stakeholder community for beef. But they also produce a lot of pork, a lot of poultry. They produce lamb, fish. They even are part of, one of their brands sells horse meat. They also produce crops, some of which are for feed, some are for biofuels. So you can see all that. I don't know if my cursor shows on this, but you can see
this is all on the left. Yeah, okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Does the color coding mean anything, or did you just get bored and want to make it look pretty?
Yeah, nice. So it does. Let's see if this will. I give a little bit more detail in the slides here, and to be super specific, the left-hand panel. So just bring us back here. It's in green. That's like the living stuff that JBS is in some way connected to through their business. In some cases they own or directly supply these living entities, animals, plants, and of course lots of humans working for them. And those are their raw materials. In the middle, the gray is the kind of industrial core of their operations. And they actually have several outputs along with the meat and sort of food products that they process and sell. They also produce electric power. They have industrial waste that comes from their facilities, and they produce a biodiesel. And then on the right hand, it sort of swings back to life, although you'll see blue is kind of the industrial logistics in the ocean, and then more life because people are eating their food. There's also leather, which is a really big product. Then there's kind of byproducts like soap, pet food, etc. So this is, and by the way, there's more to their owned and managed operations, things like logistics and shipping, different elements of the trading of the commodities, and at different stages, depending on the region, the specific product, the brand, etc. So they are big and complex.
So they actually have their own logistics and shipping.
Yes,
Okay.
I suspect they also work with others, but they do have
Yeah.
some owned and managed. And maybe we'll put a pin in that, and I'll show you
Yeah.
how I got to that level of detail.
Okay.
And just to be super explicit, this stuff gray in the middle here, these are the sort of saws that chop up the creatures. And then the
Okay.
factory where, or the slaughterhouse and processing, there is a fair bit. Anybody who's been involved in raising livestock and producing food will know there's a number of stages post life. There's the death,
Yeah.
slaughter, the butchering, and then the processing, depending on the final product. And a lot of the final product in JBS's value web is quite processed. It's lots of things. It's not just a slab of meat on a tray. So
Yeah.
many rather processed food products in their value web, plus the leather, the soap, the biofuels, etc.
Okay. So yeah, that's helpful. But you made this up because you couldn't find anything that summarized it.
That's right. Yeah. And as I was trying to find that information, so I kind of skipped to the punchline there. And as I was looking for it, I was noticing a lot of either things that I would just call issues or problems or concerns, and or questions that I wanted to dig a little deeper and be like, that's strange. It says this here, but that there, or, I'm trying to understand how these numbers or these disclosures really add up. And I hope it's visible here. I did just a very rough pass of those issues and concerns as they land across the business model or the value web. Where in the company's operations are these issues most prevalent? And that's what these are. And in this particular assessment that I did, these are interactive. You can click on these and go to one of these areas.
Well, let's have a look.
Cool. Shall we go to the diversity one?
Go. Why not? Yeah.
So this was an interesting one. Why do I cite this as a concern? I'll explain a little more. And just to remind, these red boxes are direct screen grabs from JBS's own disclosures. And, at a glance, when I look at numbers like this, I go, oh yeah, there's lots of detail here. It looks like they're giving, some transparency around, for example, on this upper left one, this is looking at the ethnicity or race, as they'll label it in this report. And so, we see a breakdown, and those pies are kind of colorful. On the left, it's Brazil, and on the right, it's the USA, where they really have huge operations and brands, etc. But a couple things struck me as sort of, okay, what's the story that I can learn from this data? Because the data isn't just a bunch of numbers, right? It's sort of like, well, what are we learning here? Yeah. And this table down in the bottom middle is the data is indeed from the report. I created the graph. So that's me taking the live numbers from their report and putting them into a spreadsheet and creating this bar graph. Because I felt like the way the data was given in JBS's disclosures wasn't really telling me stuff. I had to, let me back up. If we look at the middle panel here with these.
Yeah, I can see what you've done. You've taken the numbers from the middle panel to make the graph.
That's right. And when you look at the middle panel, it's like, okay, they're disclosing. It's there, it's transparent, but my brain can only manage the visual so much. When you put it into this very simple table, a clear story emerges, which is in Brazil, the vast majority of the management is white. Yeah. In the United States, the vast majority of the employees, who, let's remember, work in slaughterhouses and meat processing plants for the most part, there are other jobs, but those are the big ones, the vast majority are non-white. Now, I don't then propose a lot of conclusions around that, because this is a very nuanced topic, to be blunt and somewhat euphemistic. For example, the conversation around race and ethnicity in Brazil, which is a country rich in diversity and also rich in very real challenges around ethnicity, as the legacy of the largest and most populated slave community in history. So of all the countries, it imported the highest number of humans in slavery. So the legacy of that is a complex and not generally very happy racial story. The United States shares some of those concerns, but it has a different history and a different racial circumstance. So even those very simple divisions make them different. And then the economics and the operational norms of those two parts of the company have some nuance and differences. So I don't go too far with that. First of all, I just did this because I chose to take a closer look at the assessment with a materiality lens. And second of all, my intention wasn't to, make massive decisions or declarations about who they are and what they're doing, but more to just say, let's take those disclosures and make them a bit more real. What are we seeing?
Yeah, what sticks out for me is how and who knows who made the decisions, whether was it the designers, was it the managers and so on, but it's pie charts are very easy to understand and they look nice and colorful, and the ones on the left looks half and half. You think, well, okay, that sounds good if you don't look at what the labels are and so on. And then the USA one, very colorful, but then you get the stuff that you've dug into, and that's shown in a spreadsheet, and we all know how difficult that is to get your head around, like just columns of numbers. And it's just striking to me how important the two different visualizations are.
Yeah,
because that stuff on the right is the stuff that's most telling.
Yeah, exactly. And, in the human resources data, there was another thing that just struck me as wow, which was around their fatalities. So this is, I feel like this is related to the diversity conversation because simplistically speaking, non-management, non-white have a crappier go in the workforce.
Yeah.
Period. And when you're talking about really physically and potentially emotionally or psychologically challenging or draining jobs, like working in a slaughterhouse or processing, the bodies of mammals, you kind of amplify some of those challenges. So when we look at the health and safety record, there were things where, again, at a glance, it's like they're being transparent, but at a closer look, it's like, wait, what? Double takes. So for instance, that in 2021, which was the most recent reporting year for this assessment that I was looking at, the number of fatalities in 2021 was 6. So that is double what it was the previous year. And, there's 0 is the only really acceptable number. But what's really bizarre, and I don't understand this, I actually asked a couple of folks I know who have more technical expertise than I in terms of human resource and health and safety numbers and transparency and kind of compliance. And they were stymied by this. How can you report that the number of human beings who went to work alive and came home dead in a given year was 6? So that's the number of fatalities, but the rate of fatalities is 0. And I don't know if that's a mistake. I don't think it is, because their legal counsel signed off on this. These are like real transparency disclosure numbers for the company. But as a human being who is just applying my sense of what would make sense, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's hard to understand what rate even means there, because if you look down 2 rows, you've got rate of high consequence work-related injuries, and then another 2 rows, rate of recordable work-related injuries. But what are those rates? Are they percentages? It's very odd, but it does feel a bit disingenuous. It can't be 0. Whatever it is, it can't be 0. Maybe they're dividing fatalities by number of hours worked or something. But is that even a useful statistic?
Exactly. I think that's where we need to ask ourselves, aside from putting it in a table, which, as you just mentioned, is not the way that the human brain is going to take the story in. Why is this important? And, just beside the table in the bottom middle, there is an extract from the same report with commentary around how they've made progress in training and delivered effective results. And it's like, wait, but double the number of people died. So for me, like, as I'm just trying to understand, what do you do? I
Yeah.
wasn't looking for, again, to be super honest, I was not digging, going like, where's something that I can like nitpick and point out and go, you people, I truly was not looking for that. That's not what I do. And that's not what materiality is for. And then these things were sort of jumping out at me, like looking at the diversity stuff. I was trying to figure out how many folks work where in what kind of role. And then looking at those tables, I was like, whoa, that's a bit disingenuous. And then I just kept digging in there. I was like, well, what else is going on here? And seeing those fatality numbers, like, whoa, that's if I worked there, I would feel less secure and less important, I think, is how that would feel for me.
I mean, a 0 looks fantastic, doesn't it? If you're just glancing at this, I've just realized actually that what they're doing, certainly probably on the fatalities row as well, but the 1 down or 2 down, rate of high consequence work related injuries, that is the number of high consequence work related injuries divided by the number of million hours worked. That's how they've done that. It's like 233 high consequence work related injuries over 253 million hours worked gives you 0.9. Likewise, the previous 2 years. So, which seems very arbitrary. I mean, why come up with a rate? I guess what they're trying to show, to being charitable about it, what they're trying to show is, given the number of employees and the number of hours we worked as a whole, how often were injuries or deaths within that?
Right. And to be fair, some of this is just how HR numbers are often reported. So I think a lot of this falls within bounds of that. Is that useful? And are they helpfully lifting the number up in a way we can do something with? But I think that raises a bigger question, which is an opportunity for any company looking at their disclosures, is along with being compliant to the norms and expectations of disclosures, including HR and health and safety disclosures, what are you doing with this information? Like, how is it useful? Not beyond just that spreadsheet you have to serve up every now and then and go, here's our numbers. Like, what is this telling you? Which is why I come back to this, creating a table of my own to be like, what is this telling me? And if I were responsible for this information within a company, versus not one person's responsibility, but there are senior decision makers within the company who, if I were one of them, I would look at this and say, is this okay? Are we okay with this? If we're not, really, truly, what are we doing? Because this doesn't feel right. And I can't remember, let me just back out, because there's actually another visual that sums that up in their report. I didn't create this one. Just give me a sec to find it. It's further on the diversity, like, really? Bear with me here. It's just so striking where we see a photo of their board. Here we go. And, talking about diversity and inclusion. So in the same report, we've got on page 7, here's the people responsible for decision-making and governance and oversight of our massive global business. And I'll let you use your eyes and your own sense of discernment to draw some conclusions about their socioeconomic and cultural and ethnic legacy and background. And then here on page 87 of the same report is, here's who creates the value of our company. They're all smiling. Everybody's smiling in these photos. And I can imagine there's lots to smile about. But let's not pretend that decision makers and value creators are even vaguely equal in terms of how they're treated, how much influence on decisions they have, etc. So again, to a degree, that's just the norm. And they're just, we're just saying it like it is. But on the other hand, if I were a decision maker and I was looking for information and I was looking for ways to contribute to life affirming industrial impacts, I would look at this and go, there's something really wrong with this, with full respect to every human in these pictures, there's a way better way of feeding a lot of people with the best there is.
And I mean, were there declarations in the reports that said that, like, we know our diversity at management level isn't right and here's what we're doing about it? Have you just picked the bad bits, or?
Right, yeah. Not that I recall. And to be honest, Geoff,
Yeah.
you're testing my cognitive capacities because this was more than 17 minutes ago. So I don't remember exactly everything I read.
Yeah.
But in this case, definitely companies do say things like that. You know, we know we have ways to go. In this case, the interpretation I experienced was like, we're on it, we're thinking about it, here's us doing it.
Right, okay.
And, you know, and I can give another example actually, where, you know, if we go back to the business model overview of some of the places.
You do like a nature one, or?
Yeah, because I think it's a great example. I'd love to take you into the degenerative impacts on land, because one of the things that fascinated me, actually, I'm going to go slightly backwards here. Bear with me. We're going to look at deforestation. So when I'll build the bridge between diversity, where we might have hoped for something like, we're really making progress on this issue. We see we have a ways to go, you know, that kind of humility. I don't recall seeing that humility in the diversity area. Maybe there may be phrases that I'm just like not remembering, but I can say that in the area of deforestation and sort of ecological biodiversity impacts, we see actual boasting that is kind of like the cognitive dissonance just hurts my brain. So top left corner here, again, this is outlined in red, which means it is a direct extract from something JBS has made public. The vast majority of this entire assessment is JBS's own public disclosures. Occasionally, as we see in this example, I go to other publicly available resources, but they're connected by them. This is not me doing behind the scenes investigative journalism. I'm not that person. And also there's so much information, I could just use their stuff. So in the top left, JBS talks about how they are the Brazilian protein company with the lowest risk of links to deforestation in its operations. Which, given that deforestation is one of the issues that a lot of external stakeholders are concerned about, just like the shorthand, like Brazilian beef company, that sounds like the Amazon's being mowed down. That's not good. We want to make sure that's not happening. And so here's JBS signaling, well, good news. That's not us.
Okay.
There was something about the way that was phrased that I was like, I want to just double check that. So I followed the database that they reference. It's the Forest 500 ranking. And I was like, oh, I wonder what that looks like when I go to the ranking. And a couple things show up. And this is still, you know, this is connected to answering your question, how did I figure out what the company does? At this point, I'm trying to figure out, like, are they raising cattle in the Amazon? Like, how much? What are they doing about it? How much is that a part of their business, and how do they approach it? So that's how I came to this disclosure. I wasn't trying to like bust them for bad behavior. And so in this database, they are indeed ranked. This top, now this is outlined in gray, which says it's sourced from a non-JBS source, but it's all linked here. You can go look at it for yourself. And it's 2022 data in this case. And in 2022, they were given a score of 33%. Which I asked around a little bit. In fact, I asked your colleague, Tom, who was very helpful in guiding me through this data because I'm not super familiar with it. I was like, hey, Tom, is that a good ranking? Like, back in my school days, if I got 33% on something, I was in a bit of trouble. You're
redoing the year, right? If you
that's right. And you're getting, so you're staying for help after school. And I was validated in my concerns. He says, no, that's not a good ranking. So that in and of itself, that they are the Brazilian protein company with the lowest risk, says, well, the bar must have been pretty low to begin with, if that is the best we've got. And then, again, me trying to figure out, okay, but wait, who are they and who owns them and what's going on? Because I'm in that mindset as I'm bumping into this data. I've realized that they're owner, their sort of parent company. That's confusing in and of itself. And there's lots more in here. I won't bounce around too much in the slides, but if you click into some of these links, you see lots more about, well, who owns what and how do they relate? JBJ Investimentos is identified as the parent company of JBS. They're also ranked in this database, and they get an even worse ranking. So the parent is ranked terribly, and then the child is just sub-terrible.
Yeah.
That in and of itself would already be concerning. Like, wait, you're boasting about your ranking, but it's actually not very good, and you're owned by the people for whom it's worse. And then there is an organized company called JBJ Agropecuaria, which again, you can link to more info in this assessment that explains what I was able to find out. They are privately held. They are not ranked, and they are one of JBS's. It's hard to tell because I was really having trouble figuring out like who's doing what is the activity, where is the money going? But the best word I could find for who they are is a supplier or a related party to JBS. They're a huge producer of beef in Brazil. They're not even ranked. So that sense of modesty or humility is missing. And in and of itself, like the tone isn't my favorite thing, but I would be happy to not care about the tone if I felt like the life-affirming actions were prioritized. And they're really not. I mean, just one more quick thing on this, where if I go to the slide previous, which is what is linked, what we first landed on there, they feature a lot about their operations. There's lots of information. In some ways, you could say they're quite transparent. So this link on the left is from their chicken producing, I don't even want to say farming, operations in the US. And, this is an actual photo that they're proud to share. And then they talk about their animal welfare requirements. And the animal welfare requirements are really focused on avoiding injury and keeping the chickens calm. And I understand that that's part of animal welfare compliance, but that's not like life affirming. That's just
it's a pretty low bar for well-being, isn't it? Keeping them calm. I mean, you can pump them full of Valium and keep them calm.
Right. And it's just like sort of up until we kill them, we're going to minimize the drama so that our operations are as efficient as possible, right? Like you don't want chickens to be injured because then you got to deal with them. You want them to be as healthy as possible until you kill them and turn them into food. That is how they make money. So just holding on to this, like, what is the purpose of the company? Producing a lot of food as well as possible. This is what they do. They produce a lot of food. In other parts of their website, so down the middle here, again, outlined in red, you can go directly to JBS's own public disclosures about the philanthropic work they do with their fund for the Amazon. And there you hear all kinds of language about how, the people in the forest are the ones who know best how to keep it standing, about essentially being in right relationship with animals and the plants and forest, all kinds of things that I believe very strongly are quite important for the industrial norms of the future. But this is a tiny slice of relatively new philanthropic effort being paid to essentially marginalized communities versus how the company makes money. So there's a real disconnect in the purpose versus the actions.
But is the philanthropic stuff frame, are they using that as a learning opportunity to figure out how to make the image on the left look more like the image on the right?
Not in any way that I saw. I mean, what I would have loved to see, it's quite possible that it's happening, right? I'm only going based on public disclosures. I did this just in my spare time as something I think that's worth doing. I did not speak directly with anybody at the company. I certainly welcome their input and invitation for conversation, but I'm going only on what's visible. So it's more than possible that somebody there is in, or somebody's are in active dialogue around how to learn from the practices of these communities and further embed them. There's amazing kind of decolonized, very regenerative food sovereignty action in Brazil. In fact, I will link a really neat example about a family and their wider community in Brazil that I've had the good pleasure of getting to know more about. And there's tremendous things going on, not just in the Amazon, I'm not aware of JBS moving towards that. And in fact, there's a whole series of videos. I'm not sure if I linked them here. They're all in Portuguese, and I'm a Portuguese speaker, so I watched a whole bunch of them looking for that. And in the end, it was kind of just more promotional, like, you know.
If they were, my sense is from the way they've talked about some of the other things in a positive light, that if that were happening, it would be very visible.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing.
I did not see it. Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing I'm noticing with all this is that, well, I mean, you've managed to piece together some pretty stark facts, which is really helpful. But one thing I'm noticing is how diverse the sources are for all these red boxes. So how much stuff did you look at to gather this? I mean, presumably this was, you didn't deliberately go off and find loads of sources. If it had all been in one, you would have used it. So how did that all play out?
So there's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to skim us through a quick little bit because it's a bit nuts. I mean, to be honest, so hopefully you can see the thumbnails well enough to get a sense for a sec before I go deep. So just show you some quick thumbnail stuff that on slides 41, 42, 44, for example, I was seeing pages in their reporting that looked like, this is a summary of our operations. But when I dig in deeper, I just be like, wait, it doesn't hold up. I can't figure it out. Even things like, here on slide 49, they go into some detail about their 5 business units. I created this pie chart based on the numbers they describe of their 5 business units and how the dollars kind of break out. And so I was like, oh, hallelujah, 5 business units. Now I'll try to figure out where those business units are operating. But then they're kind of never mentioned again, or they're mentioned, but then there's 2, then there's 17. So then I was like, okay, I can't follow those bouncing balls. I'm just going to go straight to the kind of finer print in their annual reporting,
right? Which
they do have more kind of rigorous obligations to provide, and just break that down. It's not very exciting, but it'll surely help me out. So this is from page 16 of their financial statement, the same one in which they say they were the Brazilian beef processing company with the lowest risk of deforestation. And I just thought, okay, well, here is a list of their activities. So I'll just look to break that down. Now, this table looks pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not the most exciting table, but I'll lift up a few things. So for example, upper left, they're talking about JBS SA, like the parent company activities: beef processing, slaughtering, refrigeration, industrializing, which kind of means, turning them into other stuff, leather production, etc. So you can see listed by company, what are they doing and where. No financial numbers attached, which there could be lots of reasons for that. But at least I could kind of go down the left-hand side and go, okay, that, Sierra Alimentos, the, Braz Service wet leather, etc. And then see what do they do. But again, it kept not hanging together with things I was seeing listed in other places. There are many places where a version of this kind of thing appeared. So then I was like, okay, I was like, I'm going to just start collecting it in a table that I can make sense of. And sorry, it's not, which I did. These are, sometimes the hyperlinks don't work well when I'm on a Zoom call, but in real life, if you're hyperlinking around, this would take you to this table. Because again, it sounds like I'm just making things up. So just so you know, I'm really not. I said they list a lot of things in different places. Like this is kind of another version of that, but it's not, if you look at the company down the left, it's not the same list of companies. Some are the same, but some aren't. This is in the very same document. It's not like, oh, well, that was their old annual report or that. No, it's the same document. I was like, my brain hurts. So I created my own table. It spreads across 2 slides, where across the top, I list the entity as I've understood it, listed in the report. Down the left, I list the activity.
Okay. That's
the
cool.
green is like stuff is alive. at the beginning of that, like there's live cattle or live lambs or live horses or whatever. The pink is, it's dead by the time they're doing the thing with it.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, one thing to just highlight again is like, so remember I mentioned, I was like, hallelujah, I found the 5 business units with that, I made a little pie chart. Well, one of the 5 business units is pilgrims. But when I went through the details of the annual report and pulled out all the entities that they list in those not very exciting looking tables, one of the 5 business units, pilgrims, wasn't even listed. So I was like, did they go away? Or I don't know, is my short answer.
So pilgrims might be like a more of a public facing name for some of these.
Maybe, but so is Sierra.
Entities. Yeah, that's true.
And you've got JBS. I mean, again, I don't know, but why would they be a business unit, but not? And there's, I mean, for anybody who's really keen on like picking this apart, there are many slides showing very confusing. Like I tried to follow, like, where is JBS Australia? Yeah, I mean, again, so, not to throw them under the bus, but it was messy.
So it's easy to understand how a company of this size could have so much fragmentation in its businesses when it's operating across different regions. And I would imagine a lot of it has grown through acquisition, for example. So, other legacy reasons. But I mean, what strikes me is how are they making joined up decisions?
Yeah.
When it's like that, if that's the best they can do in their disclosures,
yeah,
what does that say? I mean, if you were CSO, or you were talking to the CSO of a large organization, with operations in different parts of the world, doing different things, although all under the umbrella of whether it's feeding the world or whether it's obtaining metals or whatever it might be. What's the one thing you would say to a CSO that might help them get their arms around this stuff?
I would, believe it or not, I would propose something very simple. I would say, map your business model. Be really clear with yourselves where and what you do comprehensively. Like if public facing, you need to focus on your most popular beef and chicken brands or what have you. There may be good reasons to do that. But when it comes to disclosures and when it comes to engaging a range of internal and external stakeholders to serve life, if it's not clear amongst yourselves what you do, it's going to be very hard to be the best there is as you nourish all those humans. And I want to emphasize, this isn't just like my kind of kooky habit of making visuals. If anybody's followed my work, I do a range of different visuals, some probably really out there, and others very simplistic like this. There's 2 very tangible corporate transparency nuggets I can offer here. One is anybody familiar with integrated reporting and what was the IIRC, International Integrated Reporting Council's early publication around integrated reporting, which came out in late 2013. So this is, we're a decade into pretty structured, well-guided integrated reporting. They write in their recommendations, talk about the importance of explaining your business model, whether you do that graphically and or with narrative and pie charts, however you want to do it. There ought to be a place where anybody looking at your disclosures can at a glance say, this is what the company does, not the cherry-picked little factoids, but at a glance, this is what the company does. So this isn't just me inventing a desire for graphics. This is a legitimate need in the context of reporting. And the other nugget I would offer is, although here we are talking about JBS, and I'm saying some somewhat critical things, and you're noticing some of the issues as well. They're not unique in not doing a great job of graphically, or at least clearly and concisely explaining their business model. And I can remember, you and I both have been in the trenches over the years, and I've done a fair bit of ESG reporting over the years, worked with a number of large companies, a number of different graphic design firms. So I can think of a few instances where we would encourage the companies to provide us with their business model so that
Right.
we could help them with their reporting.
Yeah.
They would kind of scratch their heads and go, gosh, we don't really have that. We've never written that down. We're not really sure what it would be, which is kind of astonishing, right? Of course, they would know the business and they could say lots of interesting things about it, but to be able to put it in a nutshell, they couldn't do it. So we would end up working with the graphic designers to conjure it up and obviously revise it and work with the client to get it right. And I can think of one instance in particular, a very well-recognized Fortune 100 company, that after we created that graphic, they were like, this is so useful. We use it all the time.
Really?
It's been a game changer. They ended up adapting that graphic itself for multiple communications, and it was used internally, which is a signal to me that there is a real gap in even just grasping.
Yeah.
Are you like, what are you doing? And then, are you serving life?
Yeah. I mean, even you imagine something as theoretically simple as setting a science-based target. If you don't know, if you can't point at things on some kind of map and say, well, what are the implications for this part of the business or that part of the business, and how do we ensure we don't double count and all those kind of things? Where do you even start?
Yeah.
So, without a map, you don't know where you are, but you certainly can't chart a path to where you want to be.
Yeah. That's right.
No, that's I must admit, that sounds like very good guidance to CSOs, given that a lot of them don't seem to have such a map, but I'm astonished that they don't have it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I hope it's useful in some way. I'm tempted to run down that science-based target trail, but I'll hold my fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Although
Another time.
I'll link here to one of the interviews, one of the stakeholder interviews for this project, actually, who Bill Bowie, who I know you'll know, Jeff, and
yeah, I know Bill
as well. He had some really, really helpful insights around the challenges with rigorous science-based targets.
Yes.
And I go into some detail in that here as well. But for now, I think I'll say that is thank you for prompting me to think more about how we go from understanding the purpose to what they actually do. Any final thoughts or questions you want to leave us with?
I think I'd just like to say thank you, because I mean, that's incredibly useful information. I can only imagine how many hours it took you to pull that stuff together. And I mean, it's amazing your head doesn't look more like mine. I can imagine the amount of hair I would have pulled out doing something like that. So no, thanks for providing the free resource, and and for walking me through it. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. I would be a terrible self-advocate if I didn't point out it was in the nature of a little over 400 hours. And I do have a tip jar. I'll link it here.
Okay. Good to know.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot. Speak soon.